The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Hayes Reviews. My name is Nick. I'm the creator of Hayes Reviews, and today's live stream, we are continuing with our reading of The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. We started the book on Tuesday. We read through the introduction and chapter 1 and 2, and we're carrying on tonight with chapter 3. The next chapter we're going to be reading is called The Four Revolutions. So it's very good to have you here with us. If you are watching live, if you're watching on the replay, equally good to have you here with us. In the YouTube chat, we've got Frank, LJ, Record Deepness, and Adam. Good evening to you all. It's very nice to have you here. LJ has just said, hope it's not too hot this evening in my little library. It's pretty baking, I'm not going to lie. I've got the lights on me, I've got the window shut, the door shut, and the fan off, but it's all good. It's all worth it. And you know, it's good to sweat. You get to detox. The skin, the largest organ in the human body, and sweating is the mechanism by which we get out all those nasties that we breathe in, that we sort of soak up like a sponge during our day-to-day lives in this toxic world we live in. Getting a little sweat on is always a good thing. So I'm always grateful for any opportunity. That's how I deal with ridiculous weather that is making me uncomfortable and hot and bothered. I just remind myself it's like having a free sauna. Some people pay for saunas, right? They actually spend money to go and sit in a room and sweat. Well, if you're getting that for free, there's your silver lining to that particular cloud. Take it, do what you will with it, and enjoy it. So, good to have you here, as I said. And we're cracking on with the book tonight. I don't have a hell of a lot with regards to an intro. I've got a couple of tabs that we'll whiz through, so we'll be getting into the book quick sharp. Before I go much further, I will remind people, if you're watching this on the replay, there will be a comment pinned below the video with timestamps, so you can skip the intro and go straight to the reading of the book itself, if that's what you are here for. So remember that is there only for the replay watchers. If you're watching it live, you're kind of stuck, and I've got you in a corner, and you're gonna have to listen to me ramble for a bit before we get to the book. But the book's been good so far. Charles Galton Darwin. I keep wanting to call him Francis Galton after his godfather, but I don't want to abbreviate his name to Charles Darwin, because there's another Charles Darwin out there who was pretty well known, and you might get them mixed up. So we've got to go with the full triple-barreled name, Charles Galton Darwin, every time I mention the author. Maybe we'll just call him CGD. That kind of rolls off the tongue a little easier, so CGD it might be from now on. But CGD, he was telling us in the intro to the book that he's writing this book in 1953 after 60 or so years working in the scientific field and having lots of conversations with people from very elite families, well-to-do backgrounds, the kind of people who fancy themselves the controllers and the managers of the rest of us, the great unwashed masses. So he was rubbing shoulders with the likes of the Huxleys, with the likes of the Darwins, and another family that was mentioned on the back page, the Barlows, who I don't know anything about, and also the Keyneses, John Maynard Keynes, the father of modern macroeconomics. These are the kind of families that he was mixing in. And if you've watched any of my other live reading videos, which are on the playlist tab here on YouTube, you will know that we're very interested in these families, such as H.G. Wells is from, such as the Huxleys, such as Keynes. He popped up very prominently in the Fabian Freeway book, which we read before this one. And Charles Galton Darwin, CGD, he had a lifetime of being exposed to their mentality. And so I'm really viewing this book here as a sort of window into what is their mentality. Just what is it that drives them to keep hoarding the wealth and keep hoarding the knowledge and using that to position themselves as the controllers and the parasites and the influencers and the managers, this managerial elite of the rest of the population, because it's quite a specific mindset, and I don't think it's necessarily inbuilt to all humans, right? I don't have an innate desire to lord it over my fellow men and women who I meet on a day-to-day basis. I'm not interested in the competitive, you have to lose in order that I may win type of way of looking at things. I don't feel that I am particularly qualified to make decisions that affect the whole of society and nowadays the whole of humanity, right? But this breed of person and people, they seem to have that mentality. They seem to think that they are born and destined to rule over the rest of us. And I think this might have something to do with Charles Darwin and his work on the origin of species, the preservation of the favored races, and that leading into this mindset of social Darwinism, and social Darwinism basically being the survival of the fittest. Well, we have all the money and we have all the land and the resources. Therefore, myself and my family, we must be better than you poor scum down there working in horrible conditions and factories and slave jobs, who are drinking too much in the evening and who are having too many babies and don't seem to be able to amass these huge fortunes and amass all this power and influence. They view themselves as better and superior, and therefore they are more suited to survive in this world, which is dog eat dog, which is survival of the fittest. And because they're more suited to survival, therefore they are the fittest. But of course, this whole thing is nonsense, because while they're telling themselves this narrative about how superior and better they are, of course, at the same time, putting things in place that keep everybody else dumbed down, that keep everybody else fighting, that keep everybody else obsessed with silly things, with unable to get a leg up because they build the system, they design the system, they put the rules in place, the rules favor them and their friends and their buddies, and then they pat each other on the back saying, aren't we so smart and suited to rule over these people when they're rigging the game against us? Because, and we know this is to be the case, the playing field is not level, right? If you have influence, if you have a network, if you have certain control of resources, money in particular, doors are open. We see that opportunities are given and granted much more easily and readily than if you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and overcome some intergenerational trauma that has been passed down through generation after generation to you, and you come from nothing and you have to work, like you're going to be able to work your way up to the kind of level that these people are coming from, and it's pretty unlikely. And of course, there are exceptions. People do and are able to do these incredible feats of self-improvement and focus and determination and hard work that gets them very far in life. But it's few and far between and rare to find a person of such mental fortitude, focus, energy, effort, and because there are so many pitfalls and landmines laid around us to fall into. And whether you go right back to just the schooling system and how that is designed to drive out creativity, to drive out questioning of authority, to drive out lateral thinking, to drive out following your passion and your desire and what you're good at and discovering that at a young age and dedicating your life to it so that when you're 20, you know your progress, you know what path your life is progressing on, right? That is all taken away from us, so that, and it's even worse in the modern day because now you've got people doing primary school, secondary school, then a couple of years in college. Here in the UK, college is sort of high school in America. And then you go to university, and then you might do a master's after that. You might be in school, sitting in a room, listening to the authority at the front of the room tell you what to think and what to believe up until your mid-20s. Now, it's no secret that your brain is developing right up until your mid-20s. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is responsible for executive function and making these high-level decisions and for example, delaying gratification. I'll not stay up late and drink lots of alcohol and go partying because I would like to feel good tomorrow when I wake up. The ability to override instant pleasure in order for long-term gain, that doesn't really come fully online until you're in your mid-20s. And what do many young people find themselves in? They find themselves in the situation of having to sit in front of in a room full of people their age and just listen to the person at the front talk. And, they might have to make a PowerPoint presentation at some point. They might have to cooperate with a couple of friends on producing, an essay. But it's not hands-on experience. It's all sitting at a screen moving pixels around when you boil it down in this day and age. So, and that's the system that's been designed by all these self-styled boffins, the likes of CGD here, the Darwins, the Huxleys, the Keyneses, and all the other people who might be designing our education system. And that goes right back to, let me see, I'll just put my phone on Do Not Disturb so we don't get another phone call. That goes right back to the Prussian education system, okay? Again, designed by a load of people elsewhere, somewhere else in another country, and imported and rolled out upon our youth and our populations for many generations now, so that as the kind of people like Charles Galton Darwin here, as he's patting himself on the back and thinking what a fantastic person he is and how qualified he is to predict the next million years and tell us exactly what's going to happen, as he's doing that, the systems are being designed and rolled out that will dumb down and make sure the rest of us get very made harmless and become very domesticated and are not able to engage with the kind of ideas and information that these characters and families and bloodlines have access to, right? So that's kind of what I'm seeing so far and what I'm reading in the book. He's making the analogy of gas in a container, and he's comparing gas molecules in a container with human beings on the earth, which is quite a curious analogy if you think about the physics of that. And what he's saying is that when you get a large enough number of gas molecules, you can predict over the long term how they're going to behave based on very fundamental, simple principles that they all adhere to, these gas molecules. And he's applying that same process to the human being and to human population. And he's saying the basic simple principles which can be derived about human behavior will make predicting what will happen to a huge group of humans over the long term possible. And this, of course, disregards free will and ingenuity and creativity and the ability to exercise control over your life and change your behaviors and take things in a new direction and cooperate and problem solve and form allegiances and alliances. And all these are the things that human beings are capable of. He's boiling us down to a predictable, dead, inert material that will be bounced around and messed around, and then we can predict what's going to be the outcome over 1 million years, hence the title, The Next Million Years. So that was his introductory metaphor that he used to set up the book. And then he gave us a chapter on population. And this chapter on population was very interesting because the main thing that came out for me was it reminded me of the H.G. Wells story, The Time Machine, in which the inventor of a time machine goes far, 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 far out into the future. And because it's so far into the future, the human race has bifurcated, and evolution has caused the human race to separate and split into two very distinct subspecies. And I think this is really key insight into the mind of the likes of these kind of people who plan society, who want to lock it all down so that everything is predictable and controllable and nothing takes them by surprise. They see themselves as another breed in a separate class, and they see the rest of us as people to be controlled, manipulated, lied to be kept kept an eye on, and basically domesticated like livestock, like a herd of sheep or goats or chickens that you as the farmer are responsible for. And I kind of feel like that is his attitude towards the rest of us, and that's the angle from which he's approaching writing this book. So that's my little summary of video 1, if you didn't get to catch that. All the videos that I make in this series will be under the playlist tab on YouTube. So if you want to, at any point, if you miss some and you want to go back and get them all in order, the playlist tab will be there and you can watch them all from the beginning, which is always helpful, right? So we'll just check quickly the comments and then we'll get into tonight's preamble. We've just got a lot of people saying good evening, and LJ says, yes, toxic world. But I hate saunas. Well, saunas are a good weapon against the toxic world. I will tell you that much. It does seem like a different breed of person, says LJ. Sadie's is in the chat. Hello. I'm waving. I will wave back. I don't know if it's Sadie's or Seds or Sades or Seeds. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your name, so let me know, please. LJ says, look over here while we do this. And I think that's in reference to the kind of methodology and the tactic of this elite class of people who really are just cowardly parasites because they can't be open and honest about their plans. Even though they write books and publish them, a lot of these books weren't written for mass consumption. They weren't designed to be published and circulated widely to the peons and the plebs down here. They weren't putting copies of this in every single school library and on the every public library as well. No. But they had to write the books to communicate and signal to each other somehow. And I think some of the language in this book suggests that he is giving a wink and a nod and an acknowledgement to those in the know who are also in on this plan. So that's kind of what it sounds like to me so far. But that could change. We're only 2 chapters in, and so we got a lot more to go. Record Deepness says, Thomas Dewey in the USA was responsible for a lot of damage to education over here. He pioneered whole word reading, an alternative to phonics. It didn't work and increased illiteracy. Yeah, and was that an accident? Of course it wasn't. And I think, in the USA, the literacy rate, if I'm not mistaken, used to be incredibly high. And it has been going down, and it has been getting worse. And that is despite, the enforced schooling. That is despite the increased amount of hours that our young people spend in schooling, if you include and fold in the college years and the university years and the higher education and the graduate education, you can't really learn to read unless you read a lot. And that is just not encouraged in this day and age. But also a very good comment on the method of reading as well, because people sort of, you say to people, oh, do you read, or do you read a lot, and can you read? And say yeah, and everyone thinks they know what they mean by the word reading, but actually there's a lot to reading as a skill. There's a book, How to Read a Book, it's called, by Mortimer Adler, and this book lays out 4 different types and kinds of reading, right? When I went through it and I read this book about 2 years ago, I was shocked at how much more there is to reading than opening the book and reading the words on the page. There's a lot of depth, and it's really to do with how you engage with the content and what you do with that content. Do you store it and keep that information? Do you just gloss over it and forget it soon afterwards? Are you categorizing and organizing and marking things up to come back to later? Are you linking it with other knowledge that you have? This is really the critical part of it. It's not just about scanning your eyes over the words on a page. There's actually quite a deep well of methodology underpinning the skill of reading. And so that's a very interesting topic and something good to look into. And maybe I'll explore in more depth on this channel at a later date. So Sadie says, it's pronounced phonetically, I think, but it's all good. I don't mind either way. Okay, that's a relief. And you're going to move over to Rumble, so I will see you over there. All right, let's crack on. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to put on the screen for you tonight is this website, this beautiful website. It is like a blast from the past, isn't it? Check that out. Look at those colors. Wonderful. So this is Alan Watt, the website of Alan Watt, not to be mistaken or confused with Alan Watts, the spiritualist entertainer. This is Alan Watt, and he has the website Cutting Through the Matrix, and this is one of his websites. He actually has many websites which are all listed down here. I just wanted to put this on people's radar and let people know about this incredible archive of information. If you dig through this website and you find the audio archives, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of lectures and speeches and interviews given by Alan Watt, who was an absolute book nerd. And he did a hell of a lot of reading from a very young age. And what he was realizing was that the information that he was finding in the books in his local library did not match the information he was being told when he was going to school by his teachers. So, like any young person would, he was thinking, what gives? What's going wrong? And so he went on a reading spree, became very knowledgeable and very informed about the real powers of control in our world, the sources of control and power in our world, I should say. And so you can see here, he's got just multiple hours, and he's got his own books which you can order. And he talks a lot about the kind of books which Richard Grove, for example, talks about, or Jay Dyer talks about. Carol Quigley is a one that pops up quite a lot. He'll talk about Zbigniew Brzezinski. You'll hear him talk about H.G. Wells, and I think this is a really fantastic resource. And the reason I wanted to tell people about it and mention it is because I heard of the book that we're reading today via Alan Watt and his references to the contents of this book when he was giving his talks and making his recordings and putting them up there for free for anybody to engage with and benefit from by getting onto the website and downloading them and listening to them. So I wanted to give a little nod in the direction of Alan Watt. He has now left us, and rest his soul, but his widow, Melissa, continues his good work. And there is even Alan Watt Cutting Through the Matrix book club, which you can find the link. It's underneath many of the CTTM videos. CTTM stands for Cutting Through the Matrix. You can find them on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute. And you can join the book club, and then you can read along with us. And we are talking about tragedy and hope at the moment. And I will be kicking off Saturday's conversation at 7 p.m. UK time, which is going to be about Tragedy and Hope, Chapter 8. And that chapter is all about international socialism. So I just wanted to foreground up front, give a little shout out to Alan Watt and Melissa, the wonderful work that they are both doing, and the book club. So if you want more study and exploration of books this is a great place to go for that. Okay, next tab. So we got Charles Galton Darwin. We did a little bit about his biography in Tuesday's video, where I foregrounded the chat with his Wikipedia page, because we can pull out a few details on here. We can see that his younger sister was married to the brother of John Maynard Keynes, which gives us an idea of how close these elite families are. His son was also married to the great-granddaughter of Thomas Huxley, who was Darwin's bulldog. They're very close-knit. They keep it in the family in many cases. But today I wanted to focus on this bit over here. If we look at awards, it says he got the Royal Medal in 1935. It also says he was Fellow of the Royal Society. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Royal Society, because after all, Charles Galton Darwin was a scientist, and part of what we're up against in the modern world is this thing called scientism, and I didn't come up with that word, but I use it quite a lot. What is scientism? Well, it's a sort of worldview where you are putting science and scientists at the top of the hierarchy of authority in the world. Okay, and you will do whatever the scientists say because the scientists said so. And you will hear phrases such as believe in the science and trust the science, and the science tells us, and we are following the science. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that this has become kind of the religion of the modern world. There are many religions of the modern world. Money is one of them. But science is a really overt one, and it was one of the key ones which allowed the events of the last 4 years to go on as they did, largely unchallenged, with most people, let's say, bending the knee to these ridiculous dictates that were given to us. And it was because of their belief in scientism. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a itchy throat tonight. So we want to pay attention to any famous or influential scientific writers or families, because we're living under the yoke of this religion now, scientism, which I have to say, I'm not saying all science is bad and we need to throw it out. I think the key thing is to differentiate between the scientific method and scientism, or blind belief and faith in scientists and science itself, right? So if you know and apply the scientific method in order to prove something, or to establish something, or to interrogate or justify a theory or a hypothesis, or to test an idea, great. That is fantastic. More people should do that, I think. More people should be scientifically literate and understand how to read scientific papers and judge for themselves and see for themselves whether science is good or bad. But unfortunately, despite all our public schooling, we have to, the Prussian education system, or the Prussian schooling system, to thank for, despite all our schooling and time spent in these establishments, not that many people know how to read and apply the scientific method and understand the scientific method and recognize when it's been done and when it hasn't been done. And what this means is that many of us are left open to the machinations and manipulations of people who claim to have carried out the scientific method. But how do we know? We have to make a choice. Do we believe them or do we not? And I think a good way to test this is to substitute science or scientism for God, for example. If somebody comes along and says, trust in God, believe God, God says, God has told us we have to do this, quite a lot of people out there would be skeptical. They would say, oh, did God really tell you to do that? And, oh, you're telling me I have to do this because God told you to, right? You would really want some strong evidence and verification and some more information than simply a person standing there in front of you. If they're claiming aliens tell us that we have to do, or if they're claiming spirits from beyond have told us that we all have to wear our underpants on our face, you would be questioning that, right? But for some reason, at this point in history, we're at a stage now where people come out and they say, we're following the science. The science tells us 6 feet apart, experimental injections, underpants on your face, stay at home, close down all the gyms and the churches, keep all the off licenses and the fast food flowing, and watch the news every night for your daily dose of fear and terror, because the science, look at how many people went along with it and bought into that and believed it. And this is because of this scientism, this religion, which has just taken over and infected the minds of so many people. So I think it's worth diving into and understanding, all right, so science, what is it? Where does it come from? When has it been being done properly? When is it not being done properly? And get a bit of education and knowledge about the legacy and the history. So we'll if we go back to this first tab, Charles Galton Darwin, he was a Sir, English physicist, son of mathematician. So very, very closely knit. It says here, he was born into a scientific dynasty. A scientific dynasty, right? So this guy is on the inside of science, and if you want to look for the origins of scientism, then it kind of makes sense that you would look at the scientific dynasties that came before us. So he's a member of he's a fellow of the Royal Society. So I thought, okay, we'll have a little look at that. What is it? Well, it's an award. The Fellowship of the Royal Society is an award granted by the Fellows of the Royal Society of London to individuals who have made a, quote, substantial contribution to the improvement of natural knowledge, including mathematics, engineering science, and medical science. So this Royal Society of London, this is the oldest known scientific academy in continuous existence. So pretty good candidate, I would say, for where scientism came from. Given that it's the oldest known scientific academy in continuous existence, which means it's still going, up to the present day. And I'm sure you'll recognize a lot of these names that are associated with it. We got Newton, Charles Darwin, there's the man. We got Einstein, Winston Churchill. I don't know what contributions he made to mathematics, medical science, and engineering science, but there you are. He got a fellowship to the society. Francis Crick, David Attenborough, and Tim Berners-Lee. Elon Musk was an interesting one. I didn't know about that. And also 8,000 other people have all been awarded this fellowship to this society. So quite a spread. Stephen Hawking's in there as well. Quite a spread of people, backgrounds, and areas of influence, right? Fellowship of the Royal Society has been described by The Guardian as the equivalent of a Lifetime Achievement Oscar. So I wanted to highlight this, and I thought it was an interesting thing to include on the Wikipedia article because I don't know about you, but the Oscars, they're kind of bizarre, right? The Oscars, all these actors. What's an actor? An actor is a liar. An actor is somebody who fools you, who misleads you, who convinces you that they are feeling something that they're not. It's deceptive by whichever way you slice it. An actor is a deceptive person. Whether we are willingly deceived because we want to be taken along for the journey of the story and wrapped up in the drama, you can't deny the fact that actors are deceitful people. That's what they do. And so to have this award given out to people who deceive the best, who's the best deceiver, I always thought the Oscar was a strange thing and a very sort of sycophantic pastime where they stand around and give each other these little, pats on the back and clapping hands and a little statue and, oh, aren't you all so fantastic and whatnot. So quite interesting that it was compared to the Lifetime Achievement Oscar. I think it's good to bear in mind that before the Hollywood stars came along, that there's probably a parallel with the way this kind of group was run, this Royal Society. A lot of backslapping, a lot of giving each other awards and medals and honors and letters after their name, and in fact, being a fellow of the Royal Society does allow you to put some letters after your name, and that seems to be the main benefit of being given this award. So fellowships, what does it say? So it gives us some numbers. There's 700 new candidates each year. Maybe 60 are elected, and they can only be nominated by existing fellows for one of the fellowships described below. So you have 52 new fellows who join every year. You also have 10 foreign members every year, and there's honorary fellows. And one of these names stood out to me, Tedros. Tedros is an honorary fellow of the Royal Society. So we're seeing links already to the Muskernuts, as he is affectionately called by Jason Bermas. So if you think Musk is here to unleash free speech and save us all and rescue us from the globalists, you might want to take a second look. He's connected to the Royal Society. And also we have Tedros, the commander-in-chief, or whatever his job title is of the WHO. He was given that in 2022, in fact. How about that? And we've also got the king formerly known as Prince Charles III. And that was 1978. And this seems to be awarded to quite a lot of the royal family. And if you remember as well, in Tuesday's video, we saw that Charles Galton Darwin went to a school where many of the British royal family also went to, where Ghislaine Maxwell also went to, and where massive numbers of famous cricketers also went. So these people, you can start to see these connections and see these networks and how they link and overlap. Further down in the article, there's not much else in this article, my bad, that we want to look at. But from that one, I came to the Royal Society's page, an article on Wikipedia. This is their coat of arms, and it's quite a strange one. Because if you look at the shield there in the middle, and there's a better, closer, bigger version of it further down, there's actually just nothing in it. It's just a blank white, three-quarter nothing, which is quite unusual. Coat of arms, they usually have all sorts of designs. They usually put into quarters with different objects or animals, and this one is just white in three quarters. So I find that strange. I'm not so well versed on symbology, and particularly not the kind of symbols used in the coat of arms, but that one to me looks atypical, let's say. So what is the Royal Society? The Society fulfills a number of roles: promoting science and its benefits, recognizing excellence in science, supporting outstanding science, providing scientific advice for policy, education and public engagement, and fostering international and global cooperation. The Royal Society is the oldest continuously existing scientific academy in the world. So they really, 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 really like science. And this is where we got to be quite discerning because, as I mentioned before, scientific method, good if it's followed and it's provably followed and it's used to interrogate the laws of nature and things that are actually in reality around us, but believe and trust in the science and scientism is not so good. That is how people get led down the garden path and end up rolling their sleeves up for experimental injections. And remember that phrase because we're going to see it very shortly. So the history of the Royal Society, the founding in the early years, this was very curious. The Invisible College has been described as a precursor group to the Royal Society of London. So before it was the Royal Society, it was called the Invisible College. Now, I haven't clicked on this link and read more about what the Invisible College is, which I should do. Maybe we'll do that on the preamble for the next video. But it tells us the concept of invisible college is mentioned in German Rosicrucian pamphlets in the early 17th century. So there's a link here going back to a college which for some reason needs to be invisible or calls itself invisible, which sounds very secret society-ish to me. And then also that links back to 17th century Rosicrucianism. So that's another thing we should probably look at in our reading of this book in another, but that's a preamble for another time, not today. But that really stood out to me as the very early history of this Royal Society. So a little bit further down, there's quite a lot on this page, but a little bit further down. In 1850, the Society accepted the responsibility of administering a government grant-in-aid of scientific research of £1,000 per year. This was supplemented in the financial year 1876 to 1877 by a government fund of £4,000 per year. So they quadrupled it, with the Society acting as the administering body of these funds, distributing grants to scientists. So this is like an early sort of Rockefeller Foundation, right? Getting a lot of money and funding the people who are going to come to the answers that you want them to come to. That's how a lot of science works in the modern day. If you didn't know, it's kind of like, do you know what? We need a scientific study that's going to say cigarettes are good for you. Okay, let's fund these scientists over here to carry that out and make that discovery. So the money steers what is discovered and proven by the science, right? Not in all cases, of course. There's still going to be scientists out there doing good work and doing honest work and applying the scientific method properly. But in a large amount of cases, there's a predetermined output, and we will just throw money at groups and people and individuals until somebody finds that output, and that person, that group that finds that output, they'll get even more funding to come up with the answers that we want to find, right? But it's just interesting. This was going on in 1850, I would guess. The government fund came to an end after a period of 5 years, after which the government grant was increased to 4,000 a year in total. This grant has now grown to over £47 million, some 37 million of which is to support around 370 fellowships and professorships. So if you remember, you've got what we know about the Rhodes Scholarships, for example, and then you also have the Rockefeller Scholarships as well, which we learned about in Raymond Fosdick's book, The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation, 2 books back. So these guys are up to the same thing. They're throwing money at people, and no doubt you have to be on the inside working on the kind of problems that they want solved, namely human control, manipulation of the mind control, in order to make behavior predictable, in order to ensure that you will remain in control and on top for the next million years. Scrolling down in the 21st century, and this bit, I actually already had this highlighted, which means I've mentioned this on a previous stream. I don't think it was a book stream though. I think it was one of my Hayes Reviews Lives news streams. But in the 21st century, to show support for vaccines against COVID-19, the Royal Society, under the guidance of both Nobel Prize winner Venki Ramakrishnan and Sir Adrian Frederick Melhuish Smith, added its power to shape public discourse and proposed, quote, legislation and punishment of those who produced and disseminated false information about the experimental medical interventions. And if you are just listening to me, I read that word for word, and that is on Wikipedia. The experimental medical interventions is how this Wikipedia article about the Royal Society refers to what happened in the last 4 years and what was rolled out en masse in the last 4 years. And Wikipedia is telling us that the Royal Society, the current the current president of the Royal Society proposed legislation and punishment of those who produced and disseminated false information. This gives you a very good insight into the mindset of this kind of people, and therefore the kind of person Charles Galton Darwin, CGD, was. These people consider themselves the arbiters of what is true and false. And all well and good for discovering truth and looking for truth and putting truth as a high value and priority in your life, right? That's not what these people are doing. They want everybody else they want to control what everyone else thinks is true or knows, in inverted commas, is true. I'm trying to explain something. I'm not explaining it very well. It's not that they tell us that, and maybe they tell themselves, but they tell us that they are looking for truth and protecting truth and the guardians of truth, but they're not, right? It's a smokescreen. It is scientism. It is the priesthood of the new religion, scientism, telling you that they and only they have the truth. Only the men with the white lab coats have the truth. And you wouldn't understand it even if we let you in and we showed you what the truth is. This is why it's a religion. This is why it is trust in the science, believe in the science, follow the science, have faith in the science. I believe in science, right? I don't believe in God, that stupid nonsense, that superstitious, stupid, hard, like impossible to prove, father in the sky. That's silly. I believe in science, right? So quite a telling quote there. And this one does go on to tell us a little bit more about that. But I think the bit I just read out tells us all we need to know. Where they're at in the current day, this oldest of scientific groups. And again, here's their coat of arms, and just very curious that it's totally blank. They've got 3 lions on the top left, and my idea about it being totally blank was that perhaps they're trying to, because sometimes light, pure white, bright light can be taken as truth or God or heavenly light. And then the splitting of light into all its different colors, such as seen on the front album cover of Dark Side of the Moon, as the single beam of light goes into the prism and then gets split out into a rainbow. I wondered if there was some connection there with themselves sort of positioning themselves as the authority in this world, as the arbiters of truth, as the only means by which the rest of us, the plebs, can access truth, because there was a time in the past where it was a priesthood that did that, and only the priests who could read the sacred texts, and you had to come to truth by way of the priest, and they would be the only people and the only means by which you could come to truth. I have a feeling that was my interpretation of this coat of arms anyway. I could be way off. Very happy to hear your interpretation. If you have any, stick it in the chat, please. What else did I highlight down here? Not much apart from this bit. The president of the Royal Society has duties which are both formal and social, historically. This bit I highlighted, quite interesting. The Cruelty to Animals Act 1876 left the president as one of the few individuals capable of certifying that a particular experiment on an animal was justified. So this is extremely important, because if you remember, or if you were here for Tuesday's initial reading of this book, all the way through those 2 chapters and in the contents page, CGD, Charles Galton Darwin, refers to the human animal. He talks about the human species, the men and the women, as animals. No different than animals. Well, there are some differences. That he mentions a few differences and acknowledges there are differences. But for the thrust of his argument is that that we are just animals, and therefore we should be analyzed and treated as animals. And of course, he's probably not talking about himself and his friends and his children and his wife and his relatives and his buddies, the Huxleys, and his godfather, Francis Galton, the famous, infamous eugenicist. He's talking about the rest of us. He's talking about the plebs. So I thought that was quite a curious fact there, that the Cruelty to Animals Act means that the president is one of the few individuals capable of certifying that a particular experiment on an animal was justified. So you can see how scientism, a key part of it, is to make human beings be treated and seen as animals. In other words, my favorite word for it is to brutalize human beings, right? To lower us down to the level of brutish animals. The famous quote, "Life is nasty, brutish, and short." Well, we're constantly told that we're nothing but a monkey with shirts and ties and smartphones. Oh, we're just a monkey, aren't we? And if you think about it, what animal is one of the most experimented on when it comes to makeup or chemicals or all this sort of thing? They experiment on monkeys, and I would submit that the events of the last 4 years have been a huge, unbelievable, worldwide, global experiment on humans. But we're just animals, so it's okay. And perhaps the president of the society who has this, who is one of the few people to decide what experiment on an animal is justified, the president of the society who up here called for legislation and punishment of people who produce false information. His name is Sir Adrian Frederick Melchhuish Smith. This man is one of the few people who decides what experiments are carried out on animals. Do you think he had anything, he and his friends at the Royal Society had anything to do with the approval of this global, worldwide experiment that was rolled out in the last 4 years? I don't know. Don't have any proof. I'm just making assertions and trying to connect dots and asking questions mainly. Something to think about, though. So the rest of the article tells us about some of the fancy houses and buildings that the Royal Society has inhabited. Tells us a little bit about how much they pay for some of these. This was $6.5 million, grade 1 listed building in Milton Keynes, Chichley Hall. And then we get on to publishing. and the publishing. They have a bunch of journals that they put out, and these journals are probably very well respected. I've never read any of them, but I'm sure that these journals are held in extremely high esteem among the scientific communities in other countries, in other in other areas, in other parts of the world. These are probably looked up to and held in very high regard. And what was interesting was that the society introduced the world's first journal exclusively devoted to science in 1665. And this was called Philosophical Transactions. And in doing this, the society originated the peer review process now widespread in scientific journals. So this is, sometimes people say, oh, it's not peer reviewed, therefore it's worthless, get rid of it, it's a load of bunk, when discussing different scientific experiments and papers and articles. This has been very much the case over the last 4 years, with people questioning the science and trying to get some justification on why things are being done. Interesting to note that this group, these boys, they originated the peer review process. And, you know, the question is like, who are the peers? And what makes them worthy to be part of this peer review process? Well, it's a bunch of their buddies and their friends, and it's my good friends the Huxleys, isn't it? And it's my good friends the Galtons, and my good friends the Darwins, and the Barlows and the Keyneses, right? And this is how they give this illusion of, oh well, it's democratic, you know, because we put it out for peer review. Yeah, well, who's the peer, and what do you mean by peer? Are you putting it out to anybody to have a look at? Are you putting it out to the layman, the self-educated person, the autodidact, who has dragged himself up by his bootstraps, you know, who's built up his knowledge through interacting with the real world and being a voracious reader and is a diamond in the rough, you know? No. It's only the people with the right blood, with the right income level, with the right privilege. They're the peers. So just curious that even the peer review process goes back to these guys, this society, I should say. And then he says here, all the society's journals are peer reviewed. So how about that? What a surprise. And then there's a massive number of links underneath here for further reading, and links to other areas of Wikipedia and other articles on Wikipedia. So that's pretty much it. I think that's all I've got for this little preamble ramble. Let's just have a quick check. Oh yeah, and here's the Royal Society coat of arms. So this is one picture that came up, the Royal Society coat of arms, and this is the one that was on Wikipedia, just blank. But most coats of arms, like for example, this is Queen Elizabeth I. She's got this 4 section and then different things are harped down there. Other coats of arms have a lot more detail. So it just seemed unusual, this one here, the different houses, you know. It just seemed unusual to me that they have one which is just blank in three sections of it. So I thought it was worth looking up. I thought maybe that this was a mistake on Wikipedia, in fact, because they have a description next to it which doesn't match the picture. If we go down to this, there's this whole description here which talks about shield and a crest and helm adorned with a crown and florets, and an eagle and lions, 2 white hounds gorged with crowns. And I was looking at this thinking, these words do not reflect what this picture that I'm seeing here. But actually what they're describing is this one here, which must be the bigger full version. Nullius in verba. But I don't know, there's something creepy about it, as there are with all these sorts of symbols. And actually, let's just quickly, as a last point on this before we go to the book, this saying that it had across the bottom, nullius in verba. Nullius in verba. This means, what does it mean? It said it somewhere. I read it earlier, and now I'm just struggling to scan around and find what it means. Oh, it's right there underneath in the section that says motto. I bet everyone who was watching this was like, it's right there on the screen. Nullius in verba means take nobody's word for it. Presumably take nobody's word for it unless they have a white coat and a clipboard. And they're standing on the screen every night at 6 o'clock with a graph and a number and a very serious look on their face and a shirt and tie. And they're telling you to stay at home and shut your business down and take an experimental injection and wear a nappy on your face, etc., etc., etc. So take nobody's word for it except ours is I think the missing part of that there. Okay, that is it. We're done with the preamble. Quick review of the chats, then we will get into the book. Record deepness. Oh, hang on. Let me go back a little bit. Record deepness says it was John Dewey, not Thomas Dewey. Thank you for that correction. I appreciate it. And there was a presidential candidate called Thomas Dewey, apparently, but it was John Dewey. And does that have something to do with the Dewey Decimal System, which I know is a cataloging system for books, I think, that they use in libraries? Probably not anymore, though. It's probably all barcodes and QR codes now. Record deepness says, I do have a few pithy ideas what Churchill's contributions could possibly be, but I dare not repeat them here. Well, you could always consider repeating them on Telegram. It seems pretty safe in there to say stuff. LJ says, they do love their awards, pat each other on the backs. Yeah, exactly. Tree Dude has a little rabbit and says, gulp. LJ says, sorry, Nick, all I could think of was that awful England football song, 3 Lions on a Shirt. Yeah. I always thought that was quite catchy, but each to their own, I suppose. LJ, yeah, that's what I think. Last 4 years, we were the guinea pigs. Martin-Kevin. Hey, Nick, great preamble. Off for me dinner. Catch up int morning. Ooh, you sound like a northern lad. I'll see you int morning. Great. I hope you enjoy your dinner. And I hope you enjoy the catch up as well. All right, what else we got? On the other chats. Oh, we got Heidi. Good evening, Heidi and Rumble. And Cedis Sapiente as well. Heidi's saying, they're actors. I love it. Wow. It's for our safety. They're only thinking of our well-being. Exactly. They only care about us. They want us to be well, happy, healthy, productive. Productive, they do actually want us to be productive because they want to keep creaming off that money, the fruit of our work and endeavor. And we have a bit of chat going on in Odyssey as well. ESP. There is a lot to reading and absorbing the info. That is very useful. Thank you. ESP says, those undies were not clean. I think talking about the undies on our face, their version of the truth. I think I have that coat of arms on my Pinterest page. Awesome. Well, thank you for the comments, ESP. I very much appreciate it. And Heidi, good to have you here. Let's get into the book, shall we? The main event. We've been rambling for an hour, so I know what you're all here for. You're here for the book. You're not here for me. You're here for the book. But that's all right. I'm only here for the book as well, if I'm honest. So here it is, the next million years. So I had a look back at the video on Monday. We did about 40 pages, and I would say we'll probably get this book finished by the end of next week because it's only 200 pages long, right? So it's only 200 pages long and 40 pages per reading. We'll probably have it done next week. So a nice, quick, short, sharp, punchy book. So let's get into... Oh, hang on, a little correction there on what we were just saying. Record deepness says it was not. It was Melville Dewey who came up with the Dewey Decimal System. Got it. It was not John Dewey. So good. Thank you for that correction. I appreciate it. Plutonian is here as well, the autodidactic. What's up, sir? How are you doing? We've been having some good back and forth today about Owen Benjamin and the nature of that particular character. He was pretty close to Hollywood for a long time, so I think it's fairly safe to call him a character. All right. Let me get my mic in the right place and get comfortable. Okay. Chapter 3. The 4 Revolutions. To set the stage for the history of the future, it is natural to start by reviewing the history of the past, having regard only to the principal facts. I am trying to imagine what an historian of a million years hence, engaged in preparing a universal history of the human race, would select from our own past history as worthy of notice. I think he would select only occurrences where mankind made a step forward which was never lost again. They might be called the irreversible stages. There would seem to have been 4 such stages in the development of humanity, since the time when Homo sapiens came into existence. With the first three, everyone is familiar, so that they need only be touched on. But the fourth, which is quite as important, is so recent that it has almost escaped conscious notice. I shall call each of them a revolution, though the word is not meant to imply any extreme suddenness. In each, the germs may be detected long before, and it may have been a long time before they spread over the world. In some cases, the revolution has been made independently in different regions. The central feature of each revolution has been to make it possible for mankind largely to multiply in numbers. The first revolution occurred long before the dawn of history, and we can only conjecture its effects, though we can do this with confidence. It is the discovery of fire. By means of fire, cooking becomes possible, and so the difficulties of man through his extremely poor equipment of teeth can be overcome. The possibilities of diet are multiplied very many times, both because meat can be eaten that is not completely putrefied, and because many herbs thereby become digestible and nourishing. It can confidently be said that as soon as fire came into use, the earth could support a much increased population because so many more varieties of food became available. There was, of course, also a second use for fire in the heating of shelters, which was important, though by no means so important, since man... Hang on, that threw me a little bit there. There was, of course, also a second use for fire in the heating of shelters, which was important, though by no means so important, since man could thereby live in the temperate and subarctic regions in a way that would not have been otherwise possible. The second revolution is the invention of agriculture. This dates from the Neolithic period, perhaps 10 or 15,000 years ago, so that a good deal is known about it. The tribes that had agriculture could provide themselves with food, both animal and vegetable, far more regularly than was ever possible for the hunters or food seekers. They would become much more free than the hunters from the difficulties of the seasonal cycle and could settle permanently in one place in much larger communities. Once again, with the invention of agriculture, there must have been a great expansion of populations. The third revolution is the urban revolution, the invention of living in cities. This revolution arose in several different places at different times and apparently independently. The chief places would perhaps be Egypt, Iraq, China, Mexico, and the earliest time was about 6,000 years ago. By the close association in cities, bringing with it the division of labor, the establishment of food stores, and the possibility of relieving local shortages through the regular operation of trade, it once again became possible greatly to increase the population. All this is, of course, in the historical period, and a great deal is known about it. So much, indeed, that there has been a tendency to study and to emphasize the differences between the various civilizations rather than their resemblances. In getting a true perspective of the world, it is more important to remember that life in Egypt and life in China were far more alike than either was to life at the same period in Europe. On the analogy I made between human history and the molecules of a gas, the different civilizations are to be ranked as fluctuations from the average. So you can kind of see here what he's getting at is this idea that all people are the same everywhere. And I know that this has been sort of discussed in quite a bit of detail by my friends, Mr. Newsfist, over on his Empire of Lies series, which is hosted on the Yiz the Eunuch YouTube channel, and Rumble, and another one, maybe Odyssey. What he's trying to do here is it plays into things such as globalization, such as one world government and top-down technocratic control of everything, is to say that there are really no differences that matter between cultures and peoples. These are just fluctuations, and underneath it, we are all exactly the same, driven by the same motivations and mechanisms and values and so on. So I can kind of see that seeping through what he's saying here. They have gone in rather varied directions with most interesting differences, But it's far more fundamentally important to notice not the differences, but the resemblances. So that's what he's saying here. He's like, don't pay attention to the things that make you different from other people. Pay attention to what makes you the same. And through that mechanism, we can transform all people into global citizens under a sort of NATO-enforced one world technocratic system of digital slavery. The fourth revolution in human history is so recent that it has hardly been recognized because we are still in the middle of it, so that we lack the perspective to compare it with the others. It may be called the scientific revolution, for it is based on the discovery that it is possible consciously to make discoveries about the fundamental nature of the world, so that by their means man can intentionally and deliberately alter his way of life. So he's saying before science, there was no way for a man to intentionally and deliberately alter his life. So it's quite interesting because he's sort of contradicting himself in a sense, because he's saying on one hand that men are like molecules of gas which can be predicted and the outcome can be predictable and is inevitable. So there's a sort of predetermined inevitability to everything, therefore stripping us of free will. But he's also saying that science gives us the ability to intentionally and deliberately alter his way of life. So it is science which gives us the ability to make decisions and gives us free will, in other words. Our histories are so detailed and run so uniformly through this period that it has hardly been noticed as constituting a revolution. That it is so may be perceived by observing that the population of Britain has increased more than fourfold since 1800. And much the same is true of many other parts of the world, by no means exclusively among the white races. Moreover, during the last 150 years, the whole manner of living has been more changed than in the previous 1500 years. It is true that life in Western Europe in 1750 was very materially different from life in AD 100 in Italy. Gibbon notes, almost with surprise, that at its zenith, the population of Rome was considerably smaller than that of London in his own day. Since London, unlike Rome, was by no means unique among cities, this shows a considerable advance in the art of living close together on the ground, but it is likely that it was due to steady, though not revolutionary, improvements in transportation, in particular water transport, since this would make very much easier the transport of food into concentrated areas. In other matters, too, of course, there were important changes such as printing and the military arts consequent on the use of gunpowder. But without belittling these changes, there were on an incomparably smaller scale than those witnessed between 1750 and 1950 in nearly all parts of the world. That was a huge sentence. It started here and it went all the way down to there. It would surely be just to say that London in 1750 was far more like Rome in AD 100 than like either London or Rome in 1950. So this reminds me of what he said in the earlier chapters on Tuesday's reading, part 1, about how nobody really cares about small towns and small villages unless they become civilizations and empires. In which case, the early small village of Rome is interesting because we know that it grows and becomes an empire. That's quite an interesting point that he made. Again, trying to say that, you know, you could apply this to this one world top-down government thing. It's like, well, if they do establish a top-down one world homogenized culture, global citizen culture, which applies to everybody on the planet, it will literally, according to this guy's view, make all other histories of small towns and smaller countries and movements and empires irrelevant and uninteresting because they didn't grow to the size of this one world system, the open conspiracy, right, that H.G. Wells talks about. I remember him saying that in the earlier chapters, and it's quite insidious, quite creepy, and quite revealing about his sort of mentality and his attitude, I think. Okay, carrying on. Germs of the scientific revolution can, of course, be seen long before its actual birth. Just as no doubt there was sporadic agriculture before the Neolithic revolution. There were discoveries, and very useful discoveries. Then, as now, unfortunately, it was military science that seems to have progressed most. But there appears to have been little idea that discoveries or inventions could be deliberately made of such a character as really to alter the world. The germinating idea is to be found in the experiments of Galileo and in the writings of Bacon. But the revolution may be said to have been born at the time of the English Industrial Revolution. Excuse me a moment, I'm just going to have a sip. Dry throat. I try and do that quickly so it doesn't interrupt the flow, but where did we get to? The germinating idea is to be found in the experiments of Galileo and the writings of Bacon, but the revolution may be said to have been born at the time of the English Industrial Revolution, and in particular through the invention of railways. In this revolution, unlike the previous ones, we can have an exact knowledge of the effect on population. In a century, the population of England, in spite of much emigration, was multiplied by 4, and this alone shows what an exceptional period it has been. For, if the same factor of multiplication were to continue, the result would give a quite fantastically impossible increment in even 1,000 years. The principal contributions to this revolution have come from the Atlantic seaboard, and the greatest increments have therefore been among the white races. But the benefits have been shared by most other parts of the world. Ooh, that's kind of a spicy thing to say in this day and age. The white races did something that benefited the rest of the world. This guy really needs to check his privilege. For example, the population of India used to be held in check by periodic famines and pestilences, but the introduction of modern hygiene and the administration of the famine code, made possible by railway communications, have had the effect of increasing the population of India at a guess by a factor of more than 2 in a century. I might tab this page, because the previous page that I tabbed was also a kind of non-PC, modern-day PC admission of something that you're not allowed to say anymore, are you? You're not allowed to say it. There we go. It's a good point, though. The railway really did change a lot of things. We didn't have to drive around on horses and donkey carts and that sort of thing. The central fact of this revolution has been the discovery that nature can be controlled and conditions modified intentionally. But just as the city may be regarded as the symbol of the urban revolution, so there is a symbol for the new one. It is the fact that the earth has become finite. There are no longer any frontiers containing the unknown, and nothing can happen in any part of the world which may not have important effects anywhere else. In the long past, there was always the danger of invasion from beyond the frontier by the army of some unknown and perhaps superior civilization, or conversely, there was the possibility of the colonization of a vast, fertile, unoccupied country. There is still a very great uncertainty about what incursions there may be from other parts of the world, but the uncertainty is now one about human nature, no longer about geography. The finiteness of the world is one of the chief things that make it possible to foresee its future with a degree of confidence now that would have been impossible little more than a century ago. So notice as well up here that he's talking about nature being controlled. This is probably, I would say here, reading between the lines, what he's talking about here is the central fact of this revolution has been the discovery that human nature can be controlled and conditions modified intentionally. Because we kind of know that all these guys that's really ultimately what they're about, is controlling other people, making them predictable, and putting mind viruses into their subconscious which drive behavior and make them do things which do not benefit them, make it impossible for them to organize, to wake up to the conditions that they're living in and wise up to the agendas and the things that are being done to them and organized, like all that has been sort of stripped and taken away and made very, very difficult without a sort of Herculean effort of focus and learning and willpower. And willpower as well has been eroded and taken away from us, as has our attention span in many cases. You know, a lot of people will see that this video might be 3 hours long and they're like, ain't watching it. You know, most people want 30 seconds or 3 minutes these days. And I say most people, but I mean the consumers of digital content for the most part, particularly young people. That's the time frame that they're willing to consider investing. They see 3 hours like, no, thank you. This is working against us, because coming to grips with the agendas and the problems in the world and the situation that humanity is in and the solutions and the way that it's going to pan out and how and the monumental effort it's going to take to avoid it is something that takes quite a bit of time to wrap your head around and get familiar with all the moving parts, right? So reading between the lines, I think here he's talking about human nature. I suppose, so remember in the intro, he said that this book is based on conversations with people who he was unwilling to name. Perhaps some of those conversations were along the lines of, do you know what we figured out how to do? Do you know what insights we have gained into the workings of human psychology, which now allow us to better control the plebs and to better manipulate people by infecting them with ridiculous worldviews and ideas and playing them off against each other and using the classic divide and conquer tactics. Maybe some people were telling him about this, and instead of coming out right and saying it, instead of being open and honest, you know, he's keeping that little bit back, and he's sort of saying, well, we figured out how to control and condition nature. I mean, human nature is part of nature, you know, the big nature, the concept of nature. So it's kind of an admission. But that would just be my sort of reading between the lines, given what I know of this sort of parasite class of people and what they're into. It's all utilizing a knowledge differential against us. Where did I get to? Here. The word civilization signifies in its origin the mode of life connected with living in a city. And since there has been a great variety in the modes of life practiced in the different cities, it is reasonable to speak of many different civilizations. There are still very different modes of life in different parts of the world, but they are united throughout the whole world by the new knowledge and the new mode introduced by the scientific revolution. There is really need for another word to replace the word civilization, a word which would connote the universality of the new culture. But no such word has come into use, and I shall not attempt to invent one. If there were such a word, it would be accurate and not cheaply cynical to say that the fourth revolution has destroyed civilization, for it has replaced it by the new and superior mode of life. So I've just thought of now as well the parallel with Klaus's Fourth Industrial Revolution, right? So we got Charles Galton Darwin back in 1953 talking about the fourth revolution being the scientific revolution, and now we're living through the fourth industrial revolution, right? So just interesting the sort of link and the parallel there. But what an admission! It has destroyed civilization. There is now no civilization. There is no culture. There is no tradition. There is no legacy of wisdom passed on, philosophy passed on through the ages, preserved. That's gone. That's destroyed. In the words of Yuval Noah Harari, that's over, you know? So it's a similar kind of message and tone that I'm getting from reading this. It is a natural question to ask whether there may not be other revolutions in store for humanity. The answer is that one future revolution is nearly a certainty, while there may well be others. The fifth revolution will come when we have spent the stores of coal and oil that have been accumulating in the earth during hundreds of millions of years. This will probably be well within 1,000 years, a very much shorter period than the periods between the other revolutions. It is to be hoped that before then, other sources of energy will have been developed. The subject will be discussed in detail in the next chapter, but without considering the detail, it is obvious that there will be a very great difference in ways of life. So here he is telling us fossil fuels are going to run out and we're not going to be able to use them anymore. So pretty funny how he knew this back then, right? Before the technology was developed, although he was into x-rays, right? And so maybe he was working on some sort of technology that could see stores of coal and oil in the ground, and he knew something about them running out. But 1953, and he's telling us the coal and oil is going to run out, so we're going to need something else, some other way to keep going. After all, a man has to alter his way of life considerably when, after living for years on his capital, he suddenly finds he has to earn any money he wants to spend. Like that applies to all men. Like all men everywhere have this pile of capital to sit on and to invest and to that really tells you a lot about the mindset of this guy, isn't it? Like all men, they have to alter their way of life when their capital runs out and suddenly he has to earn his money. Well, like, no, Charles Galton Darwin, most people only get to spend the stuff they earn, and that has been the case throughout most of history, right? So just another insight into the class and the window and the reference points that he has from his life, projecting that out onto all people everywhere. It's kind of silly. Whether a convenient substitute for the present fuels is found or not, there can be no doubt that there will have to be a great change in ways of life. This change may justly be called a revolution, but it differs from all the preceding ones in that there is no likelihood of its leading to increases of population, but even perhaps to the reverse. What? I mean, just to mention Mr. Newsfist and Yiz the Eunuch again, they often refer to what happened in the last 4 years as a revolution. And if you think about it, I think that's a good way. I kind of refer to it obliquely as, the events of the last 4 years. You know, I'll say something like that. Maybe I'll call it the Big C event or the big scam of 2020. But I think calling it a revolution is actually a good way to think about it. Knowing the origins of revolutions and, you know, books such as Fire in the Minds of Men, knowing things like the Fabian Freeway and how communists and socialists will get in and stir things up and cause a revolution to overthrow the current existing hierarchy and power structure, in order to bring in something that's more, shit and evil in many cases. Quite astounding to me there that he's saying that this next revolution is going to lead to the reverse of increases in population. And record deepness, that what you just put on the screen, which I'm not going to pronounce, but it's COVID-19. I won't say it all together. Although COVID-19, that shouldn't set off a sensor, or, well, we'll see, because I just said it. But yeah, so quite incredible foreshadowing. How did this guy know that it was coming and that the next one would decrease the population? Quite incredible. All right, let's carry on. What other revolutions in the remoter future may there be in store? This is perhaps not a very profitable speculation, since such revolutions cannot be foreseen. If any one of them could, we should, by the very fact, be on the highway towards it. Nevertheless, with this caution in mind, it is interesting to make conjectures about the subject, bringing to bear on it the very considerable knowledge we now possess of the nature of the world round us, and allowing free rein to the imagination. So just that page there was pretty epic. This is page 52, and on page 52 he's telling us oil and gas is going to run out, and there's going to be a massive change in the way we live, and that change is going to decrease the population. That was a good little nugget. All right, and he's used the highway as a metaphor here. He's saying we'll be on the highway towards a revolution. Remember, the highway metaphor was the the metaphor used by Rose Martin to come up with the title Fabian Freeway, saying that the Fabians used to be the turtles. They used to have a slow, plodding, gradualist methodology. And now they're on the highway. They're burning the oil. They are using a turbocharged engine to accelerate their plans and rapidly bring them into reality. And it's interesting that he's saying we're on a highway to the next revolution, the one which may decrease population. Nevertheless, with this caution in mind, it is interesting to make conjectures about the subject. Oh, I just read that bit, didn't I? Apologies. There will no doubt be periods again when the world flourishes exceedingly, but these do not necessarily count as revolutions. The essential feature of a revolution is that there should be an irreversible change in the ways of life. Thus, suppose that after the practice of agriculture had been well established, there had arisen a reversion from it over a great part of the earth. In consequence of this, so many people would have had to die that the remainder would certainly have seen the error of their ways and returned to the practice. The 4 past revolutions have all had this quality of irreversibility, and so has the 5th, which I have adumbrated. All these revolutions have been concerned with man's control over his external surroundings, and my first speculations will be as to possible extensions of this kind. It must first be recognized that the impulse of the 4th revolution is by no means exhausted yet. Even without any new discoveries at all, and new discoveries are being made every year, there would be very great changes still to come in the near future. The population of the earth could increase very greatly without any new discoveries at all. It might reach a level of density over many parts of the earth as great as it is now in the more populous regions. Even if this expansion were to take several centuries to come about, it should be counted as belonging to the 4th revolution. Future scientific discoveries may lead to other advances, but these could only be counted as belonging to a new and separate revolution, if the present series of advances came to an end and was followed by a period of comparative stagnation for a few thousand years. The most likely cause of another revolution would be the discovery of some new large source of human food. It might be found possible to synthesize food from its chemical elements, or it might, for example, be found possible to turn grass or wood into a satisfactory human diet. So you're not even eating the bugs now, you're just eating the grass and the furniture. This would constitute a new revolution, the 2nd scientific revolution, for the new food supplies would induce an enormous increase in population. And once the practice... So he's talking about eating grass. What animals eat grass? Ruminant, domesticated, harmless livestock, cows, and dare I say it, sheep. For the new food supplies would induce an enormous increase in population, and once the practice had become widespread, there could be no drawing back. I shall not consider the matter further here, since the question of food supplies is reviewed in a later chapter. Oh goody. Could there be any discovery in the arts, as opposed to the sciences, that might lead to a revolution? There will undoubtedly be many new and exciting discoveries in the arts. There will be new schools of painting, music and literature, and these will contribute a great deal to the happiness of the world, or at any rate of a great many people in it. But they hardly seem to fall into the class of what I have called revolutions, for it does not seem that through them any radical change could arise, which would irreversibly alter the ways of life of hundreds of millions of the human race. It seems precisely in this condition of irreversibility that the arts fail, for in them, much more than in other branches of knowledge, there is a frequent tendency to revert to earlier models. In this sense, reversibility is an important characteristic of art. Well, I hope they can reverse the current state of pop music and modern art, painting, film, what else? Television, I hope they can reverse it all because it's all garbage. But I have a feeling they won't. There is another imaginable revolution, or I might put a tab on this bit about humans eating grass because that's pretty crazy. Excuse me a second. I know it gets in the way when I tab things, but I think it's worth it. It's like L'Oreal. Boom. There we go. Doesn't take too long. I can't believe you said that humans are going to eat grass. I wonder if they'll actually... Imagine if they do that. It's like, oh yeah, it turns out the bugs are no good after all. So you can only eat grass now. But you're not allowed to grow it because there's a hose pipe ban. That'll be what happens here in the UK. Can't water your grass, there's a hose pipe ban. Sorry. All right, where did I get to? There is another imaginable revolution which would occur if, by any means whatever, it were found possible to foresee the future with substantially greater accuracy than we now can, so that it might become possible to know with a good deal of confidence the most probable consequences of any proposed plan of action. It is what we all try to do even now as far as we can. It is indeed what I am trying to do in the present essay on the long-term scale. But I am imagining that some new discovery should make the process far more precise for short-term planning. This might come about, for example, through the use of the new high-speed calculating machines, which in a short space of time might explore the consequences of alternative policies with a completeness that is far beyond anything that the human mind can aspire to achieve directly. AI. So there's AI for you. The high-speed calculating machines. If this were the way the revolution was made, it would have to count as yet another scientific revolution. But I do not want to exclude the possibility that it might all come about by some other non-scientific means, though it seems a good deal less probable than this should be so. I do not believe that the Delphic oracle will be revived, and if future famines are to be foreseen and avoided, it is far more likely that it will be done by scientific weather forecasting than through Joseph's interpretations of Pharaoh's dream. I was sure for a second there he was going to say scientific weather manipulation. But he's just talking about forecasting it. He's not suggesting we control it, which is a surprise. However this may be, if the future could be more confidently predicted, it would evidently have an immense effect on world history. For example, no country would embark on a plan of rapid world conquest if it could foresee that the war would almost certainly end in crushing defeat after 6 years. Little dig at the Germans there. The possibility of making such predictions would have the real character of an irreversible revolution, in the sense that no nation which had grown used to consulting the new and reliable augurs would ever revert to the haphazard methods which are all that we possess at present. So he's kind of suggesting that if we come up with scientific driven calculation machines which can predict the outcome of anything we do, that will bring about world peace, basically. Unless the scientific calculating machine tells us that we are able to take over the world, in which case the country owning the machine that told it to do that would probably take over the world, or try to. Because we've got to do whatever the scientific augurs in the calculating machines tell us. These possible revolutions share with the past revolutions the quality that they would increase man's control over external nature. The fifth revolution, the shortage of fuel which I have adumbrated, will in fact decrease it, but it will have the same character of being an external revolution. But there is also the possibility of an internal revolution. This would come about if means were discovered of deliberately altering human nature itself. I shall discuss this in later chapters after a closer review of the innate qualities of mankind. Here it must suffice to say that the prospects do not seem at all good. All right, so that's okay then. So he's saying the prospects don't seem good for altering human nature. It's not going to stop him trying, though, is it? There is first the extreme difficulty of making such changes, and the probability that most of them would be for the worse. And secondly, if by chance a revolutionary improvement should arise, it seems all too likely that the rest of mankind would not tolerate the supermen and would destroy them before ever they had the time to multiply. It was mainly the belief that there will be no revolutionary change in human nature that emboldened me to write this essay. As I have said, these speculations about future revolutions are only the wildest conjectures. Leaving aside the unknown date of the fire revolution, we know that within less than We know that within less than the past 20,000 years, there have already been 3 revolutions. If this can be regarded as a precedent, it suggests that there should be a revolution at least every 10,000 years. That is to say, more than 100 of them in the span of 1,000,000 years. I confess to very considerable doubt as to the likelihood that there are so many revolutions in store for our descendants, but at any rate, it is hardly profitable to speculate further on the subject. And that's the end of chapter 3, the 4 revolutions. Chapter 4 coming up next is material conditions. There it is. How about that? That was an excellent chapter. I'm just going to have a sip. Then we'll have a look at comments. Yeah, I put 3 tabs in that chapter. We could just go back quickly and have a look at the first tab that I put in. If I remember rightly. Oh, yeah. Oh, that was it. Yeah, he was talking about how the white races are decreasing. That was it. I thought that was an interesting thing for him to mention. So, like 1953. How are we doing in the chats out there? Ooh, Heidi's been pretty active over on Rumble. Biodigital slavery, she's saying. She says, we were given fire. Discovering fire is patently ridiculous if you take a day to think about it. I don't have a day. I'm far too busy. Quest for Fire is the cinematic equivalent of dumbing down, in my opinion. Heidi says, this guy's an awful writer. I've got to say, his way of phrasing things has tripped me up a few times, and I've stumbled over some of these awkward phrasing and sentences, for sure. Heidi says, the Indian population was controlled by human sacrifice. How's that for PC? And she also says, peak oil is one of the lies. And she says, I call it an unveiling. Yeah, I've heard this peak oil skepticism before. The main book I have on that, which I haven't read yet, is right here. It's called The Energy Non-Crisis by Lindsay Williams, who was a pastor, who was a chaplain, and he was a chaplain to the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. So he was literally on the front lines of this. And there's videos of him online, and you can listen to those videos. And I'm very much looking forward to reading this. I did put this book in the poll, but it didn't get enough votes, unfortunately, to be read on the channel. But it could be a good one to dive into at some point. Okay, what's going on in YouTube chat? I don't think we've got anything more in Odyssey, CESP. So YouTube chat. Goodness me. All right. LJ says, all hail science. Plutonian says, I think the urban revolution he's talking about is the axial age. LJ, my daughters, I send something longer than 30 minutes and it's nope. Yeah. I know, it's sad because there's certain things you just can't boil down to a 30-second snippet. Frank says the scarcity card. Yeah, he's playing the scarcity card, and it's just incredible how prescient he was. It's almost like he knew things. Record deepness. I just realized that The Abolition of Man came out in 1943. Yeah, that's 10 years before this one. Lewis had this guy's number 10 years before this even got published. Yeah, great point. Plutonian says, Nick, I prefer donkeys and carts. How dare you? I gotta agree with you there. I mean, I've never ridden around on a donkey pulling a cart. or on a cart pulled by a donkey, I should say. But I bet it's a nice, relaxing, calmer, slower pace, but more fulfilling way to travel, because you can take things in, have a look around. It's not high speed. You're not going to kill anybody or crash or anything like that. Frank Lennon says, irreversible change, the Great Reset? ? Yeah, I think that's what was popping up for me as well, thinking about the fourth revolution and the fourth industrial revolution. LJ says, this man is hilarious and dangerous and mad. LJ says, moo. I think this is in reference to the bit about humans eating grass. And Record Deepness says, to be fair, seed oils and margarine aren't a million miles off. That's a group. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's something about seed oils being like engine lubricant. Isn't that right? And they were sort of, it was probably an Edward Bernays type effort, PR campaign to get people to accept putting them in their bodies, when originally they were developed to lubricate engines. And as we know, the human body is not an engine. It's a very different thing altogether. Transhumanism, says Frank Lennon, about the comments with regard to changing human nature. Yeah, exactly. Interesting too that he used the Superman, the word Superman, or I don't know where that originally comes from, but I know it was part of the Nazi ideology, wasn't it? And they got it from somewhere else too. But quite interesting, he used this idea that the Supermen would not be allowed to live because everybody else would wipe them out. Plutonian says, cellulose is already in shredded cheese. I didn't know that, but I don't eat shredded cheese. And anyone out there, you should stop eating shredded cheese if you are doing so. It's not that difficult to grate cheese. Record Deepness says, the author accepts the limited nature of fossil fuels, but sees the Industrial Revolution as irreversible. I don't think industry survives without coal or oil. But very good point. Yeah. So we are really seeing some contradictions here. There is no free will, but science gives us free will. Okay. This kind of stuff. It's kind of incoherent. It's not a academic piece. But he did say as much as the intro. He did say that it wasn't going to be referenced, and that this was just him sort of spitting some ideas. And but I think, with the intro, I feel like this is more telling the plan. That's what I think, because he had these conversations, and he's not going to reveal who he talked to, and so much of what he has said has come to pass and been borne out. Was he just an absolute genius who knew so much about everything that he could tell what was going to happen next? I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's a lot of evidence to the contrary to suggest the things that he's saying were inevitable and have come to pass since he wrote the book are actually just scams that are being perpetrated against us, backed up by phony scientism and adherence of scientism. ESP points out that you can run a diesel engine on cooking oil. Yes, you are not a diesel engine, right? So don't put diesel engine fuel into your body. Top tip. And I know Heidi will back me up on that one. ESP says, is electrolysis a swear word? Not on my channel. And we will see if these videos get a strike anywhere after the fact. But I don't think so. I'm not quite sure why you're asking that question either. That's confused me a little bit. But have a sip and we'll get back and do another chapter. I agree, LJ. That was a brilliant chapter. Let's see what's coming up. He foreshadowed a few interesting things as well. So I'm going to move the mic and then we'll get back into it. Go to the book cam. And I knew that was coming, right? This last bit here where he says, so far I've been talking about man controlling external nature. But what if we can control internal nature? I just knew that was coming. So I suppose by this point, we're all a bit too familiar with the globalist technocracy, fourth industrial revolution rhetoric that we can see it coming a mile away. But it's still valuable to go through these books and read them because, like I said, 1953, it's not a new thing. This reveals the agenda, the long-term planning, the fact that people have been known about this and saying it was coming and pushing this as an inevitable outcome that was unavoidable because there is no free will and everything is fixed because it's just all. What's the word for that? What's the word for when everything is just the outcome is already predetermined because there's an ism word for it. If anyone knows what ism word I'm grasping for, chuck it in the chat, please. Predeterminism, something like that, or determinism, is that it? Anyway, chapter 4, material conditions. The future of the human race, of course, must depend on the nature of the inorganic world in which it lives, so that it is well to begin by reviewing this. So this is a very materialistic scientific worldview. Everything is just inorganic, lifeless matter, which spontaneously organized itself into complex life for no purpose and no reason, accidentally because of mutation. In the first place, all astronomical and geological evidence indicates that the climate of the Earth has been roughly constant for more than 1,000 million years, and there is every reason to think it will continue so for many million years to come. That is definitely worth tabbing and remembering. He did say that already, didn't he, actually? He did say that in a previous chapter that we read on Tuesday. But I think it's worth tabbing that and remembering that this was probably the consensus back then, before the Club of Rome figured out that man was the enemy of man, and that global weather crises fit the bill in searching for a common enemy to unite the world's people. They realized that energy crises and freak weather events fit the bill. They did say fit the bill, didn't they? All right. There is always, of course, the chance that there may be a dark star moving through space towards the solar system so as to collide with it. The collision need not be very severe to end the history of the human race, for a perturbation of the Earth's orbit, which might, from the astronomical point of view, be counted as quite small, would be sufficient to change the climate enough to destroy all life. Cheery guy, isn't he? We obviously cannot know whether there is a dark star approaching us, because it would be invisible until it was quite near, but we can say that it is extremely improbable. First, if there were many such stars, one of them would probably already have hit the solar system during the era of 2,000 million years for which the Earth has existed. Source, please. Secondly, in the intensive study of the heavens by astronomers, collisions would have been observed between other stars, and though new stars, novae, are found rather frequently, their character does not suggest that they were caused by collisions of this kind. There is also another class of new stars, the supernovae, only rather recently recognized. The last one that occurred in the galaxy was Tycho's star, which happened in 1572. For some time it was so bright as to be visible in daylight. It is still very doubtful what makes a supernova. It might be a stage in the life of every star. But their rarity makes this unlikely, and as the Sun is by all standards a very normal, astrophysically uninteresting star, we can be fairly sure that it will not blow up in this way. The general conclusion of the astronomical evidence is that it is very unlikely indeed that there should be a catastrophic end to the Earth in 1 million years, or any substantial change in its condition. That is, of course, unless humans keep eating steak and driving their cars around and going on holidays and not recycling their yogurt pots. But if we keep doing all that, then, we should be all right. Though the Earth's climate has been roughly constant for so long, there have been minor fluctuations in it. Thus in England, we are only now emerging from an ice age. This is the last of 4 recent periods of glaciation in the northern hemisphere, and there were 3 intermissions between these periods when the climate was even warmer than it now is. Okay, let's try that one again. This is the last of 4 recent periods of glaciation in the northern hemisphere, and there were 3 intermissions between these periods when the climate was even warmer than it now is for quite a long time. We cannot therefore be sure that there are no further ice ages coming to us. All that can be said is that though there have undoubtedly been other ice ages in the more distant past, they are, geologically speaking, rather rare events. Also, theorists claim to have given an explanation on astronomical grounds for the recent 4 ages. But then, if there had been 5, might they not have discovered a different but equally cogent reason for there having been 5? So we cannot be quite sure that there may not be more of them to come within a few tens of thousands of years. However, these things are trivial. For as first Scandinavia, then Scotland, and then England became uninhabitable, so the climate further south would improve. Rain would fall in the Sahara, agriculture would flourish there, and a general shift of population southwards would leave things much as they are. In this connection, the direct influence that civilized man has had on geography may be noted. Okay, let me read that one again. In this connection, the direct influence that civilized man has had on geography may be noted. Less than 10,000 years ago, England was connected with Europe over what is now the North Sea. This region was gradually drowned and, but for the direct action of man, most of Holland and the English Fen country would by now also have been drowned and indistinguishable from the North Sea. But these are comparatively minor matters, for the evidence of the past shows that the sea level has altered up and down quite considerably on account of the varying amount of ice locked up at the poles, and it is evident that as trivial a change as 50 feet in the level of sea would entirely defeat man's efforts to preserve the low-lying regions, or conversely with a rather larger change in the other direction would make it impossible to preserve Britain as an island. So the sea levels changing. Classic bit of climate change fear-mongering, which has, not happened. Man's direct influence on geography is really quite negligible. On the other hand, his indirect influence on geography has been more considerable, since he has made very perceptible changes in climate by the felling of forests. So he's on deforestation as well. This felling tends to remove the spongy cover of the ground which acts as a reservoir for water, and it leads to a consequent erosion of his fields. All this is now very much on the public conscience, and some remedies are being found, so I shall not go into it. It does, however, illustrate how the short-term increase in the area under cultivation may be very detrimental to agriculture in the long run. It is more interesting to inquire whether man may hope to gain any direct control over climate. In the first place, it can safely be said that it is quite impossible that he should directly cool the tropics and simultaneously warm the northerly regions, for it must always be true that the average temperature will be higher in the lower latitudes. If there were to be another ice age which would cool the tropics, this could only be at the expense of still further chilling the poles. But there are exceptions to this general principle, which are brought about by the circulation of the ocean. The Gulf Stream has given northwestern Europe a climate roughly equivalent to that found in other parts of the world, from 10 to 15 degrees further south, and conversely, the Humboldt Current of cold water off the west coast of South America has made northern Chile and southern Peru much more habitable than other parts of the tropics. Currents on this vast scale are of course uncontrollable, but there are other cases where control, though it may be impossible, is not unimaginably impossible. For example, the Bering Strait is only 50 miles wide and not very deep, and great currents flow through it to and from the Arctic Sea. If it were blocked, these currents would cease, and it may be that the climate of Northwest America and Northeast Asia would be considerably changed, though I have no idea whether it would be for the better or for the worse. If it could be confidently calculated that it would be very much for the better, so that an area of the size of a small continent was made habitable through the blocking, it might become worthwhile considering the devotion of quite a fraction of the whole world's resources to the stupendous task. On an altogether smaller scale, there is the question of rain-making. As is well known, it has recently been found that when there are heavy clouds which are nearly raining, they may be made to rain with the help of solid carbon dioxide powder. The cloud was very near the point of instability, and the small stimulus was enough to topple it over. The most obvious use that could be made of the process is not actually to make rain, but rather to choose the place where it shall fall. Thus, unwanted rain might be made to fall in the sea, or it might be possible for a district needing rain to get it out of clouds which would otherwise have only let their rain fall later in another region. Political complications seem very possible if this should be done. Yep, that is definitely one to mark up. So it's well known, as it is well known. So in 1953, the Huxleys and the Darwins and the Galtons and the Keyneses, among them it was well known, in the Royal Society, it was well known that we could choose where clouds would release their rain. This reminds me of that video from, I think it was from the BBC, and it had Jeremy Clarkson, and he was visiting a cloud making device, this engine, which spewed out all this steam, which rose up into the air and became a cloud, and which then fell upon the earth. And this was Jeremy Clarkson. He's a staple of British television. And here he was just saying, that's a cloud machine behind me. And then it blew out all this stuff. And then the next thing, he's standing getting soaked in rain. He's like, oh my God, we just made it rain. That machine over there made it rain. And yet there's no weather modification, and there's no, and that's just all a conspiracy theory. And Charles Galton Darwin is a conspiracy theorist of the top variety by telling us about this well-known method to make it rain wherever you would like it to. So I'm going to put in the... So whoever read this book... Ooh, I've been muted. So the bit you just missed that I read through was basically him in this chapter down here. I don't know how I muted there. That was totally accidental. What he says is that it's very unlikely that we will ever be able to alter the climate because of the enormous amount of energy involved in doing that, and making that happen would render the effort pointless, and there'd be no point going after it. So the conclusion is this bit here: it does not seem likely that man can ever do a great deal about directly altering his climates. So that's quite another important statement as well, isn't it? Climates are all going to stay the same for millions of years, and there's really nothing that man can do about changing it. I'm not muted, am I? No, I'm not. Okay. Hasdak called me a boomer. How dare you? But I'll forgive you because you said good vid right before that, so that's all good. A thing that will assume enormous importance quite soon is the exhaustion of our fuel resources. Yeah. Coal and oil have been accumulating in the earth for over 500 million years, and at the present rates of demand for mechanical power, the estimates are that oil will be all gone in about a century. Oh, that's 30 years from now. And coal probably in a good deal less than 500 years. For the present purpose, it does not matter if these are underestimates. They could be doubled or trebled and still not affect the argument. Mechanical power comes from our reserves of energy, and we are squandering our energy capital quite recklessly. It will very soon be all gone, and in the long run, we shall have to live from year to year on our earnings. All the energy from coal and oil came from the conversion of the energy of sunlight into the chemical energy contained in plants. The conversion is not very efficient, and left to itself, the vegetable kingdom certainly will not, year by year, produce even remotely enough energy to satisfy our present scale of demand. So this bit is very curious, and we learned a word, didn't we, for and I'm really frustrated that I can't remember it, but we talked about a word which means oil it regenerates itself. It's generated within the earth. It's not this billions and millions years long process of decaying, dinosaur bones and leaves or whatever. I forget the word for it though. I should have written that one down. Biogenesis, something like that. Abiotic. I'm sure it's got bio in there. That's what I can remember. So the question to me is this little narrative here about millions and millions of years for coal and oil to develop within the earth. Is that true? Or is it not true? Maybe it is true. And he's telling us the truth here. And this is one of the things that the parasites, the elite of our world, are concerned about, and this is why they want to lock everything down and lock everybody in and get things under control before it becomes apparent and obvious to the average man and woman on the street that these things are running out. That could be it. Abiogenesis. That might be it. Thank you, record deepness. The other alternative is that this narrative here is a load of hokum, and actually the oil does replenish itself and rejuvenate, and we can get more of it as much as we need, which is what Pastor Lindsay Williams, I think, tells us in this book, The Energy Non-Crisis. If that's the case, and that is known to the likes of the Charles Galton Darwins of the world, then they're hiding and occulting that truth from us because they want to give us an alternative narrative of scarcity, which they do it in every other way. There's always a scarcity of money, a scarcity of property, of land, of food, of jobs, of everything you could want. The name of the game is artificial scarcity. It's not about let's create abundance so everyone can have their needs met, right? It's about let's have a stranglehold on the distribution and production of things so we control and get to say who gets how much of what. So the point I'm making is whether this is true or not is very important, and it'd be very good to know for sure, because if it is a lie and Charles Galton Darwin was lying about it this far back in 1953, that would be quite something, I think. Anyway, where are we? Here. Water power is the only really big present source of energy that can be counted as income and not capital. It derives its energy from sunlight too, through the evaporation of water in the ocean and its precipitation as rain on the mountain tops. Though water power is important, it contributes a fairly small fraction to the present demands of the world, and estimates do not suggest that it could ever expand so as to supply the whole of the demands. During the long run of 1 million years, a great deal more energy will be needed. it is worth giving consideration in a little detail to the shortage of energy, both because of its tremendous importance to human life and because it is possible to speak about it with some confidence. There are going to be many shortages of all sorts of things in the future. For example, metal mines will be exhausted, and many of the metals we now use will run out someday. Some of them in the very near future. Has that happened? Have we run out of everyday metals? But it can reasonably be expected that fairly good substitutes will be found for them. But energy is different. There is no substitute for energy, and no way of creating it. It is no use adopting the Mikober attitude that something will turn up. I've never heard that word before, Mikober. Does anybody know where that comes from, what it means? Have you heard it before? Am I saying it right, more importantly? It is no use adopting the Mikober attitude that something will turn up, an attitude which may be admissible over the shortages of metals. But not for energy, because for that, nothing can turn up. The utmost that can be done is to discover the key to unlock some known but at present unavailable source of energy. This is true even of what many will regard as a newly discovered source, atomic energy. For the existence of this energy has been long known, and the novelty is that the key has only recently been found. In the light of these considerations, I shall devote a little space to considering what are the future prospects of energy for the use of humanity and from what sources it may be derived. Atomic energy has been much discussed in recent years as a source of power which may ultimately replace coal. It is certainly too early to estimate this with confidence, but the prospects are really not very bright. The only method of getting atomic power, which is at present in sight, is from uranium. Now, uranium is a fairly common element, commoner than silver, but not as common as lead. But present estimates suggest that the total energy that could be derived from the Earth's uranium is very roughly as much as has come and will come from coal. It is unlikely to be 10 times as much, and it is certainly not 1,000 times as much, so that it would not help in the long ages to come. Moreover, there are very few mines where it is strongly concentrated, and for the rest, it would be a costly and destructive business to work over vast bodies of poor ore in order to win relatively tiny quantities of uranium. The matter is made only a little better by the existence of the rather commoner element thorium, which has not yet been tamed into giving up atomic energy, though this will probably happen someday. The production of energy from uranium and thorium, as far as we can judge, will always have to be done in piles, which have to be very large units if they are to work at all, so that the distribution of the power to the users is itself quite a problem. Furthermore, there are really formidable secondary difficulties associated with making energy from uranium. There is the familiar political danger that it is impossible to get the power without at the same time making large amounts of explosive materials suitable for atom bombs. Then also there are made large quantities of intensely radioactive fission products, the cinders of the furnace, and even at the present time, when developments are still almost rudimentary, the disposal of these cinders is a formidable problem. On the whole, then, the prospects of power from uranium are not very good. It may be a useful palliative in the energy shortage, but it almost certainly will not provide a long-term solution. It is well known that there may be a possibility of making atomic explosives from hydrogen, and since this is a source of energy, it might someday be made into a fuel to yield power. It is the isotope, heavy hydrogen, that would be used, and though its proportion in hydrogen or in water is very small, still there are broadly speaking unlimited stocks of it. In practice, it takes a good deal of energy to separate it out from the ordinary hydrogen, but the amount is trivial compared to the energy it would yield after the separation. There seems little doubt that the heavy hydrogen will someday be made to explode with the help of a suitable detonator, but this would become useless as a source of power. For that purpose, it is necessary that it should be made to burn slowly, and this may be an insoluble problem. If, however, it could be done, it might yield a permanent solution of the fuel problem. To complete the picture of atomic energy, there is ordinary hydrogen, which potentially contains most energy of all. It is ordinary hydrogen atoms that yield the energy which keeps the sun and stars hot. This they do through a series of rather complicated reactions at enormous temperatures, which gradually unite them into helium through the agency of atoms such as carbon and nitrogen. As far as we can judge, this energy is permanently locked up in the case of the hydrogen on Earth, and perhaps it is a good thing. For if it were not so, there would be quite a probability someday of an explosion which would wreck the whole Earth and indeed the solar system. The burning of heavy hydrogen must always be controllable, because it has to be preceded by the laborious separation of it from ordinary hydrogen. But if it were possible easily to burn ordinary hydrogen, sooner or later some madman, or perhaps a disappointed would-be world dictator, would set fire to the sea in such an uncontrollable way that the wave of burning would consume all the hydrogen on the Earth. A rough calculation shows that the energy would be enough to make the Earth shine for more than 10 years as brightly as the sun does now. Just going to have a sip. This is a pretty fear-mongering stuff, isn't it? Setting the ocean on fire. And there's a footnote for that bit. For this kind of calculation, it's convenient to use the principle of relativity and count energy by its weight in tons. The sun radiates 4 million tons of energy every second. To estimate the amount of hydrogen on Earth, I assume that the sea holds most of it. The amount of water in the sea has been estimated at about 1.4 times 10 to the power of 18 tons. 1/9 of this weight is hydrogen, and of each atom of hydrogen, 8 parts in 1,000 are available for atomic energy. The result is 1.2 times 10 to the power of 15 tons of energy, or as much as is given by the sun in 300 million seconds, which is about 10 years. Ooh, scary numbers. It would make the solar system into a very respectable new star. See, so just that language, right? The Earth, the sea is set on fire and all the hydrogen burns, and it burns with the ferocity of a star, and Charles Galton Darwin calls it very respectable. just crazy way to speak and talk, and I don't know, but not surprising at all. Okay. On the whole, it's very satisfactory that we are never likely to be able to burn our hydrogen. Finally, there is a conceivable source of energy in the annihilation of matter. This would give a supply hundreds of times more potent than the burning of hydrogen into helium, and it would presumably be hundreds of times more devastating. But it is quite unknown whether it can happen at all, even in the hot interiors of stars. It is safe to say that long before this source could be used, some of the milder forms of atomic energy would either have been made available or else would have destroyed the world. Since the prospect of getting atomic power on a really large scale seems not very good, and since water power, which is much the most straightforward source of energy, is going to be inadequate, it is important to consider what other sources might be exploited. Possible sources, in addition to vegetation, are the direct use of sunlight, solar power, wind and tides, the interior heat of the Earth, and the cold water at the bottom of the sea. So that is sounds a lot like sustainable development, don't you think? Some of these can never provide large powers, and others suffer from being very diffuse in their distribution, but they all deserve consideration. The internal heat of the Earth is already being exploited at an installation in Italy, where steam is raised by pumping water into hot fissures in the Earth. There may be other places where this could be done, though it is hardly likely to be on a large scale. Indeed, in principle, it would be possible to use any volcano as the furnace of a power station, but it is hardly a practical proposition in view of the unreliable habits of volcanoes. The existence of volcanoes is attributed to deep cracks in the ground, which, at regular intervals of time, let in water to a depth, where it is boiled under pressure so that it explodes out again. This suggests the possibility that man might directly tap this source of heat by, so to speak, making artificial volcanoes which he controlled so that they never reached the surface. Man-made artificial volcanoes. What could go wrong? Brilliant plan. And all the world's supervillains could live in them. Heat does not flow out from the center of the earth very fast, and nothing that man might do could affect this rate, since he can only hope to work on the outermost few miles of the Earth's shell. Estimated on a world scale, the total energy available is not very great, and the best he could hope for would be to make a few deep borings and raise steam in them. He might hope to keep these borings under control, but even if he was successful in this, there would still be a price to pay, for his disturbance of the temperatures in the Earth's shell would almost certainly sooner or later lead to earthquakes. In the light of these considerations, not much can be expected from the Earth's internal heat, beyond a few more stations like the one in Italy. An experimental installation has been set up, or at any rate proposed, with the aim of deriving power from the difference in temperature between the surface water of the sea and the water at the bottom. Wherever there is any temperature difference, it is theoretically possible to get power from it, but the amount depends on the magnitude of this difference. In the depths of the oceans in all latitudes, the water is only a degree or two above freezing, and in the tropics at the surface, it is perhaps 80 degrees Fahrenheit, so that there is no great margin to work on, and enormous quantities of water would have to be handled to get any reasonable amount of power. The possibility of this power is guaranteed by basic theory, but I do not know what mechanism would actually realize it. It would only be feasible to tap this source in special places, such as tropical oceanic islands, for only in such places would there be a high surface temperature together with proximity to the cold ocean depths. It may be conjectured that this source of energy would be too expensive to be much used. The wind blows on account of unequal heating of different parts of the earth, so that its energy is derived from sunlight, like that of water power or of the fuels we are now burning up. It could provide considerable amounts of power by means of windmills. The difficulty is that each windmill can only collect a rather small amount of energy, and this at irregular times, and so to make the wind a really useful source of power, some method of storing the energy is quite essential. The most straightforward way of doing this is to have a large number of mills which pump water up into a reservoir whenever the wind blows. And then, when the power is demanded, the water of this reservoir is used hydroelectrically. This tends to limit such a scheme to hilly country, where the differences in level make it possible to construct the reservoirs. A more profitable development, not yet in sight, would be the invention of some really cheap way of storing energy chemically. The ordinary electric storage battery is exactly the kind of thing needed, but it is far too expensive. Indeed, if any cheap device should be discovered, whether depending on mechanical or electrical or chemical or any other principles which would store large quantities of energy reasonably efficiently, it would go a very long way towards solving the whole power problem, whether the energy came from the wind or any other source. Assuming such an invention made and applied to the wind, the economic picture of the world would be very different from what it is now, because wealth will tend to be associated with easy power supplies. Since it is always likely to be wasteful to transmit power over long distances, it would be the windy regions of the earth that would flourish. These would include the areas of the trade winds, many deserts where a wind springs up every day, and the stormy areas which are found in high northern and southern latitudes. In these regions, there would be set up great rows and ranks of windmills together with the devices for storing the energy. How far schemes of this kind may develop will depend on how successfully the storage problem is solved. And it is possible, and it is probable that if it is solved, the wind will be an important contributor to the world's power problem. The tides are an obvious possible source of power. An interesting point is that they would tap a source of energy quite different from the other possibilities, for their power would be partly derived from the rotational energy of the Earth and partly from the orbital energy of the Moon. The use of tidal energy slightly lengthens both the day and the month. Some use is, of course, already made of the tides for power. For example, the English fens are pumped out by opening the sluice gates at low tide and shutting them at high tide. There are also quite a number of proposals where the terrain is suitable, as on the River Severn, for making barrages which trap the tide at high water and generate hydroelectric power from it. Even under the most favourable circumstances, there is the inconvenience of the fortnightly cycle, for during each fortnight the tides vary in height by a factor of 3 between springs and neaps. And high tide is at varying times of day, so that some form of energy storage is quite essential. This applies even when the conditions are most favourable, and the difficulty would be far greater if it were attempted to collect power from the tides on the open coasts. The same difficulty would arise there that arises with wind power, of having a very large amount of energy spread very diffusely. So that a really cheap method of storage is essential if its collection is ever to be at all practical. It must also be remembered that the tides in the open ocean are only a foot or two in height, and that there are not many parts of the Earth where the coastal configuration enhances them to a magnitude that would be easy to exploit for power. Britain is one of these, and if once the storage problem can be solved, here and in the other favoured areas, the tides could make a useful contribution to the power problem. The direct use of sunlight would be one of the most effective ways of getting power. Already in suitable climates, it is used for heating water by absorbing heat on the blackened surfaces of water tanks, but this is trivial compared to what might be hoped for. One obvious way of getting power would be to use the heat of the sun to raise steam by concentrating it onto the surface of a boiler by means of a burning glass, or more probably a reflector. It would be a formidable problem, for the total amount of heat falling on a square yard facing the sun is about enough in each minute of time to evaporate only a quarter of an ounce of boiling water into steam. So that, to make an engine of reasonable size, a very large area would be needed. On the other hand, the efficiency of the engine would be very good, for the temperature of sunlight is 6,000 degrees centigrade. This is the actual temperature of the sun's surface, and it signifies that the sun's rays could ideally raise a boiler to this temperature. It is the temperature that matters for efficiency, and it means that the temperature of the boiler need only be limited by the strength of the materials it can be made of. The result might be to convert perhaps a fifth of the heat into power. On this basis, something like a third of a horsepower could ideally be obtained from a square yard. This is not ground area, but area measured facing directly towards the sun, which of course will demand a bigger area on the ground. I didn't know that sunlight was the same temperature as... The temperature of sunlight is 6,000 degrees centigrade. This is the actual temperature of the sun's surface. Okay, anyway. Too late for science. The possibility of getting the solar energy directly in this way is impressive, but the technical difficulties would be very formidable indeed. Apart from all the ordinary difficulties of big engineering projects, the chief would probably be that it would be necessary to concentrate the heat from a good many square yards onto a rather small focus, for it is only so that the heat losses could be avoided which would destroy the engine's efficiency. And this must somehow be done in spite of the sun's motion all through the day and its different height at different times of year. Deserts, where the sun always shines and there is no rainy season, would be the best places for solar engines. The power would only come in daytime, and this would be less inconvenient than tidal power, but still it would be nearly essential to be able to store it. Altogether, it would be a tremendous undertaking. There may, of course, be discovered other ways of getting energy out of sunlight. For example, there may be chemical processes which would imitate those of the vegetables, but more efficiently. There is also the possibility of getting the energy photoelectrically, that is to say, by causing the light directly to make electric currents. At present, this is a hopelessly inefficient method, but it cannot be excluded that some new idea might make it feasible. And then it would probably be the best of all. Of all the possible ways of collecting energy, the direct use of sunlight is the most promising. Finally, it may well prove that the various devices discussed above are all of them too complicated and troublesome to be really practical, and that it is best to exploit the method used by nature, the vegetable. There would have to be vast plantations producing potatoes or some such plants in enormous quantities, which could be made into industrial alcohol for power. Or perhaps it might be possible to exploit the ocean by collecting the microscopic vegetables floating on its surface. The quantity of this plankton must be vast, but it is spread very thin, and the collection would be a very difficult problem. However that may be, and wherever the vegetables grew, there would be all the trouble over bad seasons and pestilences that we know too well already. And it is possible that enormous greenhouses in which the plants grew under accurately controlled conditions might pay better. But whatever was found best would have to be on a vast scale because of the comparative inefficiency of the vegetable in converting sunlight into energy. I think this completes the list of all reasonably possible sources of energy, and apart from ordinary water power, the results are not encouraging. This is hardly surprising, for it certainly involves a great deal more work to live on income than on the accumulated capital of geological ages. Our present civilization is largely based on the provision of mechanical power, and if it is to continue, it would seem likely that a good fraction of humanity will have to be engaged in collecting energy, either by minding vast numbers of machines or by tending vegetables in plantations. It will have to be a far greater number than those now engaged in mines and power stations. It is rather likely that the natural inefficiency of mankind will prevent him from realizing to the full the possibilities of winning energy out of nature, and that he will often find that he has to get on with much less of it. Turning now to other questions of the future conditions of the world, it is of course likely that many technical inventions, both of utility and of luxury, will be made, which may profoundly alter the detail of human life. As I have already explained in an earlier chapter, however, and as will be developed more fully later, these are only to be regarded as details superposed on the immensely more important questions of population and of human nature. It is therefore not worth entering on wild speculations about them, for such speculations would surely be as wrong as the speculations of a natural philosopher of 2 centuries ago would have been about our present conditions. It may be noticed, however, that the biological sciences, which in the 19th century rather lagged behind the physical, are beginning to show promise of quite astonishing new advances. The proper consideration of these biological advances must be, for the most part, be deferred to later chapters, but I may list some of them here without discussion. There is first the possibility of new sources of food. For example, if grass or wood could be rendered edible, it is safe to say that there would be immediately a great increase in the population of the world. Then there is the probability that medical science will continue still further the great triumphs it can already claim in the conquest of disease. It is also not impossible that medical science might succeed in materially lengthening life without senility, though in a world of overcrowded population it is not very clear what would be gained. Looking a little deeper, there is the possibility of substantially altering the intellectual and moral natures of individuals by some sort of hormonal injections. Already great effects have been produced on animals. Jeez. I'll read that again. There is the possibility of substantially altering the intellectual and moral natures of individuals by some sort of hormonal injections. Finally, as the most curious speculation of all, it is not quite impossible that it may one day be feasible to select in advance the sex of each child that is to be born. Whether the decision is made by the parents or by their rulers, this suggests the probability of a great unbalance in the populations of the world. Before discussing these matters, however, it is necessary to look deeper into man's nature, and this will be the subject of the next 3 chapters. So even if we come up with a way to determine the sex of your unborn baby, we might not leave that decision up to you. We might leave it up to your rulers. How about that? Ladies and gentlemen, what a chapter. I got to tab this page, and a lot of tabs in this book so far. But that chapter was 6 tabs I put in there. Next 3 chapters, well, we got chapter 5 next, the species of Homo sapiens. But the next 3 chapters, I'll tell you all 3. We should probably do all 3 in one video. That would be pretty powerful, right? The next 3 are going to be the species Homo sapiens, creeds, and man, a wild animal. That's going to take us from 77 down to 134. I don't know. That's quite a lot of reading for one video. It's almost 70 pages. So we probably won't be able to do all of that in one video. I've got to be honest. But what do you think about that? Just going to take a sip, and then I will review the comments and we'll wrap up. My feeling is that I can see why Alan Watt talks about this book. It's a very good insight into this technocratic, scientific elite view, right? And the thing to remember, or one of the things to remember, is that these bloodlines, these families, they're still going strong today. They're still occupying institutes, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Chatham House, the Royal Society. These are all still going. London School of Economics, which we learned a lot about in the Fabian Freeway book, still going. So their legacy is all around us and still unfolding. And if you think that they've all magically changed and transformed themselves and become beneficent and kind and loving and caring, then does a leopard change its spots? I mean, to say that the roots of these organizations, such as the Fabian Society being the founders of the British Labour Party, the fact that the roots and the origins of some of these groups and institutions and think tanks, etc., are never really disclosed or discussed or talked about says a lot. That we've got to go digging into old books and obscure pages on Wikipedia, and we know that Wikipedia is control. That's information control. We're not getting half a quarter of the truth on that. It's just interesting to go there and check to what is being admitted publicly, what we are allowed to know by our rulers about these things. But that chapter certainly was revealing. I'm very glad we got some nuggets from that one. It was a little juicier than part 1, so we squeezed a little more juice out of the book in this part 2. Doesn't look like we have anything new over on Rumble and Odyssey chats. Oh yeah, we got ESP. He's saying you can run a car on water, hydrogen. That is a find. Incredible. Yeah, imagine. Yeah, I've heard this before. So this is the thing. What is very So that whole chapter is all about energy and using energy and the different ways to get energy. And like somebody said in the chat, I think it was Sunny, no, it wasn't Sunny Jim, it was Record Deepness. Today I learned that sustainable energy has hardly advanced since 1953. Yeah. Is that by design? Have solutions to these problems been suppressed? Have inventors who've come up with genuine ways to solve this power problem, as he describes it, have they been co-opted, bought out? Have they been murdered, threatened, silenced? I think I haven't looked too deeply into it, but I wouldn't be surprised, because it seems like the plan is artificial scarcity. Get everyone hooked on coal and oil. Tell everyone that coal and oil is running out. Tell everyone that it's going to be an absolute catastrophe unless you let us, the scientific elite, the people who know everything and are intellectually capable of grasping the complexity of this situation and making decisions about what you should and shouldn't do, can and cannot do, step in to save you, because we are the scientific elite and we care about you so much, and we're the managers, and we're going to do what's best for you. Follow what we say, do what we say, tune into your television box every single night to get your instructions, and everything will be okay. You know, that's kind of the tone that I'm getting. It's just amazing to me that this seed was planted as far back as 1953. That back in 1953, he was telling us, yeah, we got wind, we got solar power, we got wave power, we got geothermal power, hydroelectric power, but it's not really going to cut the mustard. Nothing else is going to be invented. We're just going to faff around with these and deliberately halt and deliberately stall technological development. I think there's a good case to say that's what has happened and what we're living through. I'm sure technology is being withheld from us and developed secretly and then used for nefarious purposes, because we've been lied to about. This is the thing I always come back to. We've been lied to about so many other things. Why would they tell us the truth about any energy production, oil, coal reserves, and alternative energy sources? Why would they tell us the truth about that if they haven't told us the truth about all this other stuff? What would be their motive to do so? So yeah, incredible that 1953 was laying out the narrative that we're still being spoon-fed today, right? So let's have a quick review of the chat. Wilkins Micawber is a fictional character in Charles Dickens' 1850 novel David Copperfield. He is traditionally identified with the optimistic belief that something will turn up. And that's from Sunny Jim. Thank you, Sunny Jim. I appreciated your comment on the first video as well. And it's good to see you here in the live chat. Good to know. Wilkins Micawber. So, something will turn up. That line always reminds me of the George Carlin joke where he says, it's always awkward and he doesn't know what to say at funerals. You go to a funeral and somebody comes along and says, oh yeah, I've just lost my father. And he says, he'll turn up. And then Gwen as well says, Micawber is an allusion to Mr. Micawber, character in a Dickens novel. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you both for chipping in there and teaching me that. I didn't know. Record deepness. More uranium reserves were found in the 60s, and thorium reactors are looking more viable as time goes on. I guess Micawber might win this one after all. I hope so. I tend to be optimistic, but sometimes I don't know if I'm just being foolishly optimistic without grounds or reason to be. But I don't know. My default state is sort of optimistic overall. Sunny Jim, was CGD an acquaintance of H.G. Wells, I wonder? Certainly could be around a similar sort of time. H.G. Wells and Charles Galton Darwin's lives definitely overlapped. So I would like to know that as well. Frank Lennon, commenting on man-made volcanoes as a source of energy, says, yeah, how about the year 1811, the year without summer? I wonder why. Record deepness. Sorry, citizens, no power on Wednesdays next year. The potato harvest was bad. Yeah, so if we just grow more potatoes, maybe we can use them into some kind of fuel that we can burn. Not to feed people, of course, because that would be because we need our lights on more than we need food in our bellies. Sunny Jim says, so a slave population then. Yeah, that's what it's sounding like, isn't it? Your rulers are going to tell you the sex of your baby because they're going to decide what the global society needs. And I didn't put a bookmark in here. There we go. And they're also going to tell you when you can and cannot turn your lights on. They're going to put some sort of device in your house which goes off and charts your energy usage and tells you the peak time and punishes you if you put your television on in the peak times, and rewards you if you use your electronic devices in the off-peak. No, such a device would never exist. They do. They're called smart meters. Sunny Jim says, can't hardly wait for the next 3 chapters. Me neither, but unfortunately we are going to have to wait. Frank Lennon says, injections and injunctions. Bertrand Russell. Yep. Record deepness. This has been eye-opening for sure. And LJ says, you might run out of tabs with this book. Don't you worry. I got plenty of tabs. I stocked up. I'm not gonna make that mistake again, like when I ran out of tabs on Fabian Freeway live on air. No sirree. I learned my lesson. Okay. Right. I think we're done for today. This is proving to be a good one, and I like the fact that it's not as long-winded. We haven't got lots of references to look up and footnotes and everything. He's very to the point and direct, and I think, you know, I'm getting more and more sure of my sort of opinion and interpretation that we're being told the plan here. We're having it revealed to us. This book probably not intended for Nick Hayes broadcasting it to his YouTube channel, you know, but more so maybe for Charles Galton Darwin to loan to his friend H.G. Wells, for example, and then H.G. Wells could seed his science fiction novels with these ideas, and then those science fiction novels would be sent out there to predictively program the minds of people so that they would have these ideas in their heads, and they would accept it when they were rolled out. Because as Alan Watt so often says, we are born into and are living through a script, and most people have no idea the extent to which things have been planned ahead of time. And I think this book is kind of a very solid piece, artifact in the case that much of this is planned ahead. It is not that this guy's got a crystal ball and he's so good at extrapolating out into the future. It's not that George Orwell, whoever he may have been, wrote 1984 because he was just some sort of mystic who had a vision. You know, no, it's because there's a plan, and these people have a plan, and they know where they want to take society, and they know where they want to take us and our children and our grandchildren. This is why it's so important to do this learning. This is why it's so important to care about these old books and to know what's in them, because it's not just us in the here and now, 2024. This is an agenda which is going on for the next million years. So let's get learnified, get educated, and get up to speed, and tell other people about it. And as Mr. Newsfist says on one of his episodes of Empire of Lies, when you have predictive power, when you can go to your friends and your colleagues and they may be naysaying or doubting or calling you a conspiracy theorist or whatever, when you can say, all right then, but in 10 years time, when all cash is gone and we are all using digital money, and that digital money is being used to lock people out of society if they don't say a certain thing or do a certain thing or behave a certain way, you make that prediction now. And then when people start to seeing it unfolding, oh my God, they've banned cash, and be like, yeah, I told you they were going to do that. So that is the advantage, right? You can then get people's buy-in. You can show people that you're not talking gibberish, garbage, nonsense that you're making up, right? So that is the power of learning these things and knowing them, and then having that predictive edge over what's coming that your oblivious normie sheeple grass eating television watching news believing friends do not have. Okay, so that is my final rant. I'm going to wrap it up there. Sunny Jim, I don't trust their plan, neither do I. And Record Deepness says, no wild speculation, of course, just the next million years or so. Well, the good thing is they have their plans, they're focused on achieving them. The best thing we can do is get wise to their plans and then make our own and get focused on achieving our own plans, right? Because there's not very many of them, and there is a lot of us. And that's one part of David Icke's spiel that I actually agree with, and I think he makes a good point, because it's not all about the reptilian shape-shifting pedophiles, is it? All right, let's wrap it up there. I can't see anything else in the other chats. I'm very grateful and humbled and honored to have you with me on this broadcast, whether you're live, whether you're tuning in after the fact. It's just wonderful that people share my passion and enthusiasm for books and for learning from them. We are still intending on building up a Haze Reviews community. I'm thinking now about what that's going to look like, who's going to be involved. If you're interested in that, there's a bit of info on the outro screen, which you're going to see shortly. I will reiterate the intro screen in case you missed that. I'm building up a mailing list just in case these channels ever get shut down there, so you can shoot me an email if you want to be on that. Currently, I don't send anything out on the mailing list. I'm just gathering those email addresses of people who want to stay in touch and want to follow my work, just in case I ever get booted off any platform for whatever reason. I don't plan on doing it. I'm not hitting anything spicy. I'm just reading old books, right? What's the harm in that? But you never know these days. So if you're interested, you can join my mailing list, autonomoususername@gmail.com. That's all one word, autonomous username. It's a stupid email. I know I'm going to have to update that pretty soon with something more relevant to the name of the channel. But until then, that's what we got. There's a free gift. If you do choose to join the mailing list, I'll send you a 3-hour bundle of my original guitar music and recordings. They are, you can't get them anywhere else on the internet. That's about as much as I can say about them. And then the other thing is, if you're interested in getting a community up and running of readers, book learners, of teachers, of people who want to do more of the kind of stuff that I just rambled about on the outro to this video, then send me an email. It's the same email address. Let me know, and let's get together and start throwing some ideas around about what that could look like and how we could bring it into existence. That would be very good. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to make sure I got the correct screen queued up. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'm going to broadcast on Saturday, but it's not going to be 7 p.m. It's going to be earlier in the day. So keep an eye out for that. Instagram, Twitter, or Telegram will be where I announce that. I'm thinking it's probably going to be Saturday morning, right? So I will be broadcasting Saturday, but it'll be in the morning. So see you on the next one. And enjoy everything, because, what else are you going to do? God bless.